Oh, hi to everybody. Today I want to talk about the game balance and Path of Exile announcement that GGG released, and I also want to talk about the announcement that they released clarifying the Ascendancy changes. Because of how big this is starting to blow up, I wanted to give my 2 cents on all the changes that they're making for the new expansion and for the new league. So, just want to briefly go over this. So, Ascendancies, but heavily reworked. So the biggest thing is they improved interesting stats on Ascendancies while removing less interesting or less essential secondary stats. All right here. Theoretically, I love it. And it brings it closer to the design for PoE2. That's all great. You know, notables having fewer stats but are individually more impactful. I think that's great. I think the biggest problem with what they're saying here is that they've done what seemingly, from ascendancy wise, it seems like they've removed a lot more than they've given. But moving past that, you know, they rebalanced the power on the notables. I will need to see what happens as we continue to progress through the expansion, but just from the ascendancy changes we were shown, it definitely heavily looks more like nerfs overall than buffs. I mean, they do clearly state, for example, that Master of Metal, it got nerfed. Master of Metal got nerfed big time, but they buffed a different one for Aura of Effect. So they did more of a trade one for another, but it is very clear that, I mean, Master of Metal was an overpowered node. It was one that if you're running Impale, you literally had to take that node. There was no option. So I don't dislike the nerf, but it is very clearly a nerf, and they know it. Um, so they very clearly looked at certain nodes that gave too much, certain ones that gave too few. So they talk about how the Trickster's Escape Artist, way too strong, which it was. It's fair. It deserved to be nerfed. And then they also talked about how Slayer's masterful form was seldom taken. It just wasn't used, so they buffed it. Stuff like that, love it. All for it. Can't wait to see more of that. And then relocate stats, change the more attractive to a wide range of character builds. I think this last paragraph's just whatever. We'll see how it actually plays out, but that's just whatever. Aura stackers. Obviously, the big talk, you know, in Delirium when clusters came out, Herald stacking slash Aura stacking was vastly overpowered. So what did they do? They nerfed the Herald stacking. And then we went through Harvest. There wasn't any Aura stackers, and then the alt quals came out for specific support gems and specific auras and heralds and whatnot, and then it became overpowered again. So you know, they talk about how they've they significant value reductions on the alternate quals, which makes perfect sense. It's not surprising at all. Um, they made it so that the non-curse aura medium cluster, instead of 6 and 5%, is now a 3% buff, which is fair. That's not surprising either. I think that's totally fair. And then they've also made changes. They've adjusted Stalwart Commander and First Among Equals, which also isn't surprising. First Among Equals definitely being, I think, the bigger of the two that needed to change, but I think all that's fine and dandy. They specifically state that it's grown significantly in power both offensively and defensively, and these builds moved above their acceptable top end level power. So that's their decision as a company. They've decided that aura stackers are too strong, so they get nerfed. That's the way it is. Another non-shocker is the Impale mechanics. Impaler combined with Call of Steel. This was very obviously going to change. This is not surprising at all. Anyone that knows anything about Impaling Call of Steel, knowing that for no investment of Call of Steel, you just the amount of damage that you can do all at once, super crazy. So not surprised at all if that's changing. I like the fact that this Blade Sovereign is being included as a notable, allowing for Call of Steel to get a buff on clusters. So I think all the Impale stuff here is validated and fair. For minions, none of this is surprising. Anyone who says anything bad about any of this, just doesn't want their builds to be nerfed. I don't blame them. It's annoying when your build gets nerfed. But yeah, like they say here, Spectres and Golems always outclass the other minion alternatives. You go look at ladder at any point during the league, Spectres and Golems are always at the top. So I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty, but all of this is straightforward. Carrying Golem, Stone Golems got nerfed, no surprise there. Rotten Claw's Renewal got nerfed, no surprise there. They made buffs to the damage of Skeleton Mages. I mean, that's just whatever. And then improving underused skills. I mean, this is cool in theory. Who knows if any of this will actually be enough to buff these. They've buffed more than 40 underrepresented skills, which I think overall is cool. I think it's good for the game to see a larger variety of skills being used. I'm hoping that of the 40 that they've buffed, if even 5 of them do well, I'll be super happy. If out of these 40 underrepresented skills, if 5 of them even make it to, like, let's say 5% of the player base on ladder using them, that's a huge up for me. I think that's awesome. They made minor changes to Earth Shatter and Contagion. These are also... The Earth Shatter one I think is interesting, but the Contagion one is not at all, because ED Contagion's been around forever. Makes sense. The Flash Charge and Critical Strike cooldown, it's fine. I don't think it's anything like super crazy or notable. It's just whatever. And then unique items. So obviously the Replica Nebulous and Replica Alberon's Path got nerfed. That was, in my opinion, very obviously going to happen. Especially the Alberon's Warpath. It was super strong. It was its first league out. It was brand new. Things take practice to figure out how to balance it. And I am not saying that this is a good or bad nerf. Like the current value of 80 strength versus 50, but it needed to be nerfed. I'm fine with that. Some changes to alternate qualities. I'm not going to go over those. I like this change to Far Shot that they mentioned. I like that it has a penalty for being close, but a greater incentive at long range. I think that's really great. Making Tailwind slightly nerfed is moderately irrelevant. And then Elemental Aegis effects. I don't have an opinion on it because I don't play with it. So overall, what they've written here in game balance, this isn't patch notes, this is just their game balance. I think all this is fine. I have no qualms with anything that they've done here. That's why I also want to talk about this announcement. They're clarifying the Ascendancy Changes. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but the gist of it is that people are very upset with the Ascendancy Changes. Most of the changes up front are nerfs versus buffs. So they talk about how they want to provide ways for players to specialize their character, but there are so many filler stats. I mean, these are basically filler stats that added speed, damage, or defense. So they didn't really want the Ascendancies to be... They wanted them to be unique. They wanted there to be like a goal to achieve with Ascendancy, not just more stats. So I like what they're discussing here. What I think they wrote poorly, and this is one of those things that when you do a quick response to an outcry to the community, this type of problem is going to happen in your writing. But they talk about in Echoes of the Atlas, our intention was to streamline many of these passive nodes so that they were much simpler but more powerful. Now, the much simpler, they definitely did a good job. Again, they definitely removed a lot of unnecessary stats. Them writing but more powerful, that they didn't quite deliver on that. And then they talk about in here, the upgrades to the 40 skill gem buffs. That is separate from making the Ascendancies more powerful. And I don't think if they're going to hold true to this line right here, I do not think they did well enough of a job increasing the power of Ascendancies, like what they actually bring to the table to counteract the simplification. They shouldn't be using this to justify what they did to Ascendancies. That's not the appropriate way to go about it. I'm not saying that I mind the Ascendancy changes. I went through most of them. I looked at most of the ones that I would know about. That would be Champion, Gladiator, Slayer, Pathfinder, Assassin, Necromancer. I went through a lot of the ones that I know a fair bit about, and while they definitely nerfed a lot of it, I didn't mind the nerfs. I thought they were moderately fair. We'll have to see with all of the changes combined how it all looks when we get the patch notes. But overall, I don't think that they did anything wrong other than their wording. I think their wording here much simpler but more powerful. I think they should have written that differently because that does not translate into what they did to Ascendancies. Not that whole statement. So it is annoying. Obviously, they're being heavily attacked by the community for making these Ascendancy changes and releasing the Ascendancy changes without the full patch notes. So they've gotten a lot of backlash, which is why we got this notice. I say good on GGG. I think, keep progressing the game in their direction, their vision, I think is great. Am I bummed to see some of the nerfs? Yeah, of course. Am I going to go cry about it on a forum? No. If you don't like what they're doing, you don't play the game. You don't need to be unnecessarily mean. Just not necessary. Just either play the game or don't. You can voice your opinions, say what you want by all means, but there's just it's just so unnecessary to see so many comments just belittling GGG over comments like just like using this one little statement to make their complaint. So that's the gist of what I wanted to say. I wanted to get my opinion out there because it's very relevant to what's happening in the game right now with another 3 to 4 days, we're going to have the new league out. Echoes of the Atlas is going to come out, and there's going to be a lot of changes to the game. So I hope it goes well. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you all have a great day. Peace out for now.